Thank you once again for joining me. This is video 2 of the High Note mini-series. We're now going to take a bit of a left turn here, which is to say we're going to talk about the chest voice, or the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice. And you might ask yourself, what in the world, Jeff? You said this was about high notes. Yes, it is about high notes. And our chest voices and how we use them form the foundation for everything that comes after it. So if we don't have good vowel alignment, refer to video 1 if you want that definition, but it's basically about how they sound and making sure that they're all consistent. If you don't have good vowel alignment here, if you haven't cultivated a dynamic subglottic air pressure system, support if you prefer, though I find that to be misleading, then you have little chance of consistently making the adjustments as you move from either your chest voice into your zona de passaggio or middle voice range, and then subsequently on to what comes afterwards when you reach the secondo passaggio and then enter either your cricothyroid dominant singing voice or head voice, or even beyond that for that matter too. So the chest voice. What are we looking for in the chest voice? Why is this so important? In many respects, if we do our work here, then everything that comes afterwards is much, much easier and proceeds much more quickly. There are those who would suggest that there's no reason to start practicing singing high notes until you have a fair degree of mastery in your chest voice or thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice. I'm not entirely on board with that thought, principally because in my experience of teaching, when we work on the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice or chest voice, and we work towards vowel alignment, we're also practicing subglottic air pressure, airflow, and we're also practicing tonal onsets. I'm going to get to tonal onsets in a second. And at some point, when it's starting to get close, and we're starting to understand how these things work together and why they need to work together, to me, it makes sense to then go to the upper register and start working our way down. And what happens is that the precision of technique required to be consistent starting above the secondo passaggio begins to inform and reinforce the studies that happen in the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice, in the chest voice. And what does that practice look like? The foundation, now I call them beginners on the channel, and I kind of wish I wouldn't have done that now. I wish I would have called the beginners playlist or the beginning singing lessons fundamental technique or foundational technique or something like that, because that's much more accurate. But there you have it. Some conventions, I've just decided not to take that particular convention on. Those are two of the first vowels that I introduce when I'm beginning a practice with someone on the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice, and I do that very intentionally. One, E is typically very easy to narrow or produce a sound where the vocal folds are adducted without a whole lot of conscious thought. Now, if it's spreading a lot, E, then that becomes obvious when you switch the order. And you get that really spread sound to it where the E has come so far forward and there's a grimace in the face, and all of those things you can look at to then say, okay, we need to keep the face in a more neutral position. We need to match E and A. What are the differences? Can we bring them into a reasonable middle ground? And when we've done that, we can start introducing the other vowels. A also forms the foundation of the vowels that I use to ascend into the zona de passaggio. And we're going to talk more about the zona de passaggio in video 4. We're going to just stick to the chest voice here. Now, the chest voice is in a different location for different Fox. I will get to that in a moment too. But suffice to say, from E we go to A. Usually E and U are worked on concurrently. And from there, depending on either A or U, I'll usually pick A or O, depending on the vocalist, to then start introducing those vowels, which are considered to be slightly wider. Ultimately, we want them all to inhabit roughly the same space in the oral cavity, and then we'll get consistent results. If we do not align our vowels, and that's a bit of a caricature, and that's only one caricature. Virtually anything can happen if we don't have vowel alignment. There are nearly uncountable ways of doing things incorrectly. There are but a few, maybe a handful, maybe not even that many, of getting the vowels to truly be in alignment in this range, so that we can then move on to the zona de passaggio and the cricothyroid dominant singing voices. So for the baritone, it spans a variety of different pitches as to where the primo passaggio may be. And that would be that first line in our graphic where you have the zona de passaggio represented as the bicolor, the two lines that are streaked there. That first line will be the primo passaggio. Now most male vocalists, I should say, will sing past the primo passaggio without so much as noticing it. And that leads to some confusion around the break and the zona de passaggio and mixed voice, and all of those sorts of things get perpetuated by the fact that we mostly don't notice that. But it's still there, and it's still very important. For the male tenor, the leggero tenor could be as high as D sharp 4. For the basso profondo, it could be as low as A flat 3. In the grand scheme of things, looking at 88 keys, that's not a wide range, but for the human voice, that's quite a bit. Now, sopranos, you are a little bit different in that your primo passaggio can at times be more challenging than your secondo passaggio. This depends a lot on how you've used your thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice, or for that matter, if you've used it much in your previous training, and how adapted you are to the middle range of your voice. The middle range of the soprano and mezzo voices is used very similarly to the zona de passaggio in the male voices. There is a balance. There's much more balance between cricothyroid and thyroarytenoid dominance than there is in the thyroarytenoid voices of the male vocals. And so thinking about that somewhat comparatively like the zona de passaggio for the male voices, your primo passaggio can be somewhat challenging, and it bears keeping in mind that a lot of these exercises, sopranos and mezzos to a lesser degree, and contraltos not so much, a lot of these exercises may still in fact be in your lower middle range. But again, if you've not used a lot of thyroarytenoid dominance, then that transition at E flat 4, which is typically the primo passaggio for the soprano voice, can be really, really tricky. And that in and of itself sounds confusing, because of course that's the same primo passaggio as the leggero tenor. But the thing is that the soprano's secondo passaggio isn't until F5, G5, give or take, whereas the leggero tenor, it'll be about a perfect fourth above that at A flat 4. All of these notes, all of these pivot points for our registers are approximations. It is not set in stone, and furthermore, our voices do not necessarily conform to the pitches on the piano. It is entirely plausible that we can fit in the cracks between keys on pianos, and we may also have slightly exaggerated zona de passaggios or middle voice ranges. We may also have slightly contracted ranges. Individual differences very much come into play when we're getting this specific about our technique. Now, I say all this to say, working on vowel alignment, working on airflow, and working on tonal onsets, and FYI, the tonal onset is the word that we use for starting a phrase, working on all of this in the comfortable areas of our voice, whether that's lower middle voice for sopranos or below the primo passaggio for the tenors and baritones. That is where we practice and get consistent technique such that when we start to practice exercises that begin above the secondo passaggio or are taking advantage of vowel modifications moving across the primo passaggio and into the zona di passaggio, we work out most of that technique in our thyroarytenoid dominant singing voices. We develop consistency of phonation there so that when we start to make adjustments for registration pivot points or upper register singing, we can do it consistently and accurately. Because if I can't consistently here, it is really unlikely that I'm going to be able to consistently navigate through starting at my primo passaggio, approaching my secondo passaggio, accessing my cricothyroid dominant singing voice, and then reversing it all when I descend, while I'm making vowel modifications and changing vowels at the apex of that scale. I'm not, and for that matter too, I'm not thinking about all that stuff as I'm doing that. I'm just focusing on my subglottic engagement, and that facilitates all of this. But all of the vowel modifications, all of the knowing where my registration event is and preparing for it, all of that stuff gets practiced so that it comes together, in this case for a short scale, but ultimately for the work that we do in our songs. If you've got questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section or find me on Twitter. As always, my name is Jeff. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. In video 3, we're going to talk about the upper register, about cricothyroid dominant singing voice, so stay tuned.